Welcome to another episode of This Was Supposed to Be Easy.
We've had these conversations on at least 1,000 car rides and thought it might be time for other people to join us. This is Cheryl.
And my name's Amy.
Hello, listeners. We are leading into a 3-part mini-series on that hush word, money. Yes, I said it. We are talking about why making, saving, and spending money may have originally looked so easy, but then maybe wasn't quite as easy as we thought it would be. This 2-part conversation with Dr. Jeremy Bond begins with some fictional, or at least for most of us, images of being rich that we learned through TV and movies, and quickly moves on to gaining all that we can learn from Jeremy's hobby of reading about and studying wealth building strategies. Trust me when I say that there is something for everyone.
Hi, everybody. So we are starting today with some conversation around one of those mystifying terms and words, finances. And this is a little bit of a stretch from what maybe we've talked about, but it's still right in line with things that you think should be easy. When we're kids and we're looking out and watching TV, it seems like, oh, if you want to have money, all you have to do is say that you want to live in this really cool area and do these things, and that you'll somehow have money. And we know now, as we're in adulthood, that that's not always the case. And so one of our listeners actually shared with us that they would love an episode on finances. So we decided to bring that to you. So we asked Dr. Jeremy Bond to be on our show today. Now, you might recognize that our last names match up, and that's because not only is he wonderful in the finance world, he's also my husband. So I'm going to let him hop on and introduce himself. And we want to know, where does the understanding of finance and your story with it come from?
Thank you for that introduction, Amy. I like that I'm accomplished in the finance world, and you didn't quite say it, but we'll say it now, okay-ish in the husband world. I'll take that review. That will work.
Dun, dun, dun. That's why you
Right.
get to be the first man that has been on our podcast.
That's right, and I can go on the record. I am indeed male. Thank you for that, Cheryl. No, it's cool to be here, and I'm not surprised that a listener said, "Hey, can you get someone to talk about personal finance and succeeding with money?" Because it's tough. I think it confuses lots of us. Most of us were raised in families or in situations where it was something people didn't talk about. Even if you had a wealthy uncle, you didn't know how they became a wealthy aunt or wealthy uncle. And it was just, oh, they drive this sort of car, or they retired at this age. But it's still far from a lesson, right? Most of us were left to osmosis, I think, to learn what we might know about money. And I'm one of the lucky ones. My some of my earliest memories involve financial lessons that I think probably some less positive events in my life crystallized, if you will, or made part of my permanent. You hear people talking about a core memory, right? And I have some of the traditional core memories, like funny things that my children said that I've held on to. But some of my core memories as an adult are related to finance. My father taught me that you should try to save a fourth of what you earn, which is basically impossible, I think, for most of us. But he had learned that you should be trying to save a third from an older person that he worked with in the GM factories. And I can distinctly remember him telling me that's way too much, that nobody will be able to save that much. So if you aim for 25%, if you aim for a fourth of what you bring home, that will be plenty. But experts have even kind of lowered that bar. But all that's beside the point. I think what I'm trying to share is that I had good mentors. My father was an excellent saver, to the extent that even when he died a couple of years younger than I am now, my brother and my mother and I were okay-ish, right? I mean, we didn't live in luxury, but we didn't have to sell our home. We didn't have to move. My mom had to eventually get a better job that gave us medical insurance and some things like that. But I took away some really valuable lessons. And my father, I think, was just one of many financial mentors. And sometimes I think it was simply the way I'm wired, that people, you might witness someone giving you 15 examples, life examples, and I was someone who kind of latched on to maybe the money related pieces.
I'm going to interrupt
Yeah,
you as
go
you
ahead,
say
Cheryl,
that,
please.
only because I'm thinking about the way you're wired and the fact that inside of the same family, you can have children with a very different wiring, correct? Right? Like I'm thinking of your three children right now, and one in particular who literally asked for a money gun for a birthday or Christmas or something at one point in time. I'm pretty sure you've got at least one that's wired the same as you.
Well, no, and I think that's a wonderful example. And I have a brother. And I think while we both had amazing careers, I think even he would agree. We think really differently about money, or at least we behave differently with it over our lifetimes. And that's not good or bad. We're just in different spots. But I would agree with you. And our three children, mine and Amy's, our youngest is probably wired the most like me. He's the money gun kid. And it's worth mentioning that if there are any parents among your listeners, that the place to start, even if you don't love your own financial position in the world, you can still do differently with or for or by your children.
Yeah.
Our youngest is 13. He got himself a checking account last week. The most mystifying part for him, because he has some context for the rest, was figuring out what his cursive signature looks like for the forms, because he doesn't have a cursive signature. The rest of it he understood very, very well. And to highlight your example, Cheryl, the same $120 that he decided belonged in his brand new checking account a week ago is still there, untouched. And our other child, I think, is wired up the reverse. I mean, he has plans for the money that he's putting in his account before it ever gets there. And that's okay too. Whereas our oldest is extremely frugal, like painfully so. Amy and I discovered at one point she was sort of living on eggs and rice to spend as little on groceries as possible. And we're like, you can afford to eat. But where her perspective really shifts is once she's fully aware that someone else is paying, then she's more of a the sky's the limit kind of gal. So I love that point. We are all wired a little differently toward this. And I think, that's where I'll start. So I think considering our own programming, I said this in pre-production that I watched The Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous was big when I was a kid. Robin Leach's big, borderline yelling British accent voice booming about these fabulously wealthy people and showing us their yachts and their mansions. And some of your listeners are probably thinking right now, who is Robin Leach? What is
I
Lifestyles of
can
the
hear his
Rich and the Famous?
voice.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting I want to impersonate him so badly right now, but I'm not going to subject anybody to that. But what I'm thinking about instead is that might not be the priming that all your listeners received. Their priming might have been MTV Cribs. Their priming might be, what's the show we like, Amy, on HGTV with the Lottery Dream Home, or even
Letter.
regular House Hunters, where you're watching this couple or this single buyer, whatever it might be, and you hear that, oh, they're a teacher, which is a wonderful career, right? Or they are in athletic training, or is something relatable. And then they
Mhm.
hit you with their home buying budget of $750,000.
Yeah.
And that's when the dissonance sets in, right? And let's roll that example back. We're watching Cribs and we're shown that being financially stable, or rich, if you will, is supposed to include all this kind of wild stuff. And for some people, it does, because they're fabulously wealthy. They're 1% of the 1%. They're rich in a way that just isn't practical for most of us. And I'm not trying to be discouraging. If you have listeners out there who have the ideas like the next Amazon, ideas like the next Instagram, or the next application for an AI technology that could explode and be 2028's Walmart, if you will. I'm not trying to hold anybody back, but for most of us, that's not going to be the path. For that reason, the first author that I think I want to talk a little bit about, if you all don't mind, would be Tom Stanley. And he's passed away long ago. He was actually killed in a car accident. He was driving a Corvette, and that's all kind of sad. But before his untimely death, he did some of the research that changed my thinking, that helped me start to see that the financially stable people I was surrounded by didn't look anything like the people Robin Leach was talking to. And I say Tom like I knew the guy, but I've read all of his books. I do feel close to Dr. Stanley, but he mostly wrote about ordinary wealthy people. If any of your listeners are Dave Ramsey fans, this would be EDMs, everyday millionaires, people who are quietly stable. And they aren't LeBron James or Jeff Bezos rich. It's not like that. They may be in the $1 to $5 million kind of wealth range. And for a lot of us right now, we're thinking, well, damn, 1 to 5 million sounds great. Let's talk about that. Forget the billionaires. But the key to Dr. Stanley's work is just realizing that some of the most financially stable people, they don't look like what you think they might look like. They're driving a paid off Toyota that has 180,000 miles on it, and they have no plans to replace it with a brand new lease or what have you. But Dr. Stanley studied a fairly small group, maybe like 700 millionaires in the 90s. So his first book, The Millionaire Next Door, came out, I think, in 95 or 96. That would be one of my must reads. And people can judge for themselves listening in. If you think rich is Mark Zuckerberg or what you saw on MTV Cribs, read The Millionaire Next Door, because the vast majority of wealthy people in the United States don't look like that. What was fascinating, and this proved true, the Ramsey organization did similar research much more recently with more than 10,000 subjects. And the careers people had that they used to build wealth were not the things we tend to think of. No pro athletes, no Hollywood personalities. In both their studies, teachers, K-12 teachers finished in the top. Some of the careers wouldn't surprise your listeners, physicians, attorneys. But in Stanley's original work, auctioneer was on the list. Farmers have made the list, I believe, in both studies. So it's just thinking about things in a new way. So that's the first piece of advice, would be to check out. If you're thinking, I don't want to read a 30-year-old book about somebody who lives next to me who might be wealthy, Tom Stanley's very last book, Stop Acting Rich, Start Acting Like a Real Millionaire, was an easier, maybe more, I don't know, poignant or more relatable read. So you could swap that out. But my goal today is not to drown anybody in a reading list. I promise I'm going to mention 2 more books at most, and for very specific reasons. I think I've mentioned like Dave Ramsey once or twice, and I'm on your show because you could never get somebody like Susie Orman or Dave Ramsey.
What are you talking about?
At least not yet, right?
Jeremy, we use yet here,
Not
but
yet. Not yet.
I do want to kind of jump in with that because we talk about, or we hear about Dave Ramsey, because he's got little clips all over Instagram and TikTok and things like that, and he is very successful. I'm not slamming Dave Ramsey in any way, but he also has kind of this very prescribed method. And if you adhere to his prescribed method, then you will end up with X. But it doesn't really take into account a lot of the outliers. And where I have often said when it comes to financial, let's say financial literacy, really one of the things that I would love for our listeners to know is kind of if they don't want to prescribe to do this, then this will happen, out of the box type of idea. If they want to advance their literacy so that they are conversational in it, that they understand when they walk into a bank that they can make their own decisions, or they can ask the right questions and get answers in a way that makes sense for them. So, is there a way to look at finances again as kind of demystifying it
Oh
so that
yeah.
it's understandable for the basic person that they know about money in general?
So Amy, I really like that idea of that we're here to demystify finance, that it's not everybody's jam, you might say. And in fact, some of us might be afraid of it. We didn't have all these kinds of experiences with our parents that I've alluded to that were positive, that helped us learn. For a lot of us, it's on the list with religion and politics, right? It's not something you discussed at dinner. It might even be considered rude for some families or in some contexts. And so that's why I start with Tom Stanley's work. because I do think it pulls the curtain back so that you can start to understand that being financially stable is for anyone. Regardless of how little or how much we earn, there are circumstances that can make it extraordinarily difficult, and there are circumstances that can make it much, much easier. Someone who's getting by working an amalgam of minimum wage jobs is going to have a much harder time carving out any money that's savable or investable than someone who is pulling down 250K as an attorney. It should be easier for that person. But in the United States, at least, it's often not. They're every bit as broke as the former case that I did mention. Maybe they'll be worse off. And I think it's that we're going to tie that back to Tom Stanley and getting the ideas of MTV Cribs, Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous, getting all that out of our minds, because more stuff, bigger stuff, flashier stuff, it just costs more. And that's what's wrong with one of the, I may have said this already, I may not have, but my father was the first person who ever said to me, pay yourself first. When I first started making money at like 8, 9 years old, he'd ask, how much are you going to save? That's paying yourself first. And of course, when you're a kid living at home, a lot of us have no real expenses. The opportunity there to start early gets missed by most of us, but he made sure it didn't really get missed by me. I think where I want to go next, since we were talking about Dave Ramsey, and Amy, you also touched on the sort of what I'm going to call the pushback to this highly prescribed approach. The Ramsey organization has their baby steps, and they will work if you use them. They've got millions of success cases, but it's somewhere akin to Weight Watchers or what's the diet? Atkins, right? Those diets, those programs, they work if you can stick with it, but they're highly prescribed. And I'm not anti Dave or Stanley or Kiyosaki. I should say Ramsey, Orman. I love parts of all their philosophies because I like this stuff. But for people who don't like this stuff, or maybe they don't dislike it or like it, they're neutral. They prefer not to think about money. I have friends who don't want to think a lot about it. You don't really have to. I've already touched on at length. My first piece of advice is read something, do something to expand your understanding of what wealth actually looks like so you can get rid of the mythology. Because, lots of rappers, lots of athletes, lots of stars, people lose it all. They go bankrupt, even having so much to start with. The next thing I'll say is keep it simple and watch for chances in your life to make a meaningful move. I don't mean a big thing. Like most of us aren't out there watching for the next corporation that's ripe to be acquired. We don't have that kind of resources. We're not doing mergers and acquisitions, but we might get a new job. Lots of us will finish school or finish a program, certification, college, whatever, and we'll get in the job market and we'll be at benefits orientation one day, I hope, for a lot of us. And this place might tell you they have a 457, a 401k, a 403b. They might have Roth options. And that's the moment where it can be a wow, what is all this? All of those do one thing. They help working people save and invest toward a financially stable retirement. That's it. So you hear IRA, Roth IRA, 457, 401k, 403b, SEP IRA. I can go on, but you'll want to edit a lot of this jargon out, maybe. But that's all it is. They're just retirement savings accounts. And the place you work will largely determine what kind of account they can offer you. So you don't need to get super caught up in the numbers and the letters. There are differences. And this is an area where if you want to consult an expert, you want to ask questions of your benefits person, but don't think they're an expert. When I say expert, I mean maybe you want to go see a certified financial planner and have that person in exchange for an hour of their time, $100, whatever they charge, get their advice on which program to choose. But it's simpler than that, in my opinion, too. You're going to use the account your employer gives you. There's two things to look at. Do they contribute? And by they, I mean, let's pretend you get a job at Acme Widget Corporation. And it's a decent job, right? You're fresh out of school. It pays reasonably well. Maybe your starting salary is $50,000. And There is a maximum amount that the government will let you put into accounts like this. Most of us don't have to worry about that maximum amount because it's high enough that if I knew it off the top of my head, it's halfish of a $50,000 salary. And I think we determined earlier, saving a third, too hard, saving a quarter, too hard. So what do experts say? They say 10% at least. Ramsey might be higher, Orman might be lower. They all have their nuances on this stuff. But look at whether your employer contributes and whether your employer, so that's the first thing. Does this place where I work, do they put money aside for my retirement? Second question, is it a match? And that's the first point, I think, where people get confused because the numbers, they're just a little different than school level arithmetic, right? You'll hear, oh, it's a 100% match up to 4%. What the hell does that mean? And all they're really telling you is if you do 4%, they will do 4%. If you do 8%, they will do 4%. If you do 28%, they do 4. You get the idea. If they say it's a 50% match up to 6%, then that may mean that if you do 6, they do 3. It may mean if you do 12, they do 6. You have to figure out which it's going to be, and that your benefits person can tell you. So where I leave that, retirement savings, new on a job, to simplify it, to not make it your life's work, just do whatever you need to do to get their money too. You say, oh, I can't, I'm going to need a new car. I need this, I need that. YOLO, I want to live too. I just can't only focus on the future. Our wiring as humans, we stink at imagining our future selves. And that is one of the evolutionary underpinnings that makes all this so tedious and disinteresting for a lot of us, or scary, is we don't really have a good handle on what our 70-year-old selves are like, even if we think we do. Carter and I may have a better handle on that. But again, that's about our wiring, right? Most people, we're not wired that way. The second thing then that where this gets a little harder, you're on this new job, is they have a vendor. If you grocery shop, maybe you get some stuff at Walmart, at Aldi, at Meijer, those are your grocery vendors. Employers have usually a single, maybe two retirement savings vendors. And you've heard some of these names, listeners: TIAA, CREF, Fidelity, Prudential. They're investment firms, but it's the vendor that your employer brings in to manage your retirement savings. And so you have to choose from the funds they offer, the fund just being a place where the money goes, right? You might bank with JP Morgan Chase, but you don't just walk in, give them money and say, here, it's for the bank. You have to tell them, this goes into my checking account, this is going into my savings account. And so within your retirement account, you've got different places, kinds of places you can put money. And the Ramsey group, this is where I will suggest, like, if you want to read a Dave Ramsey book, maybe the Financial Peace book or his leadership book, but he'll explain mutual funds about as well as any of the gurus. My advice is you don't really need to know a lot about mutual funds. The markets are indexed. So when you hear people in casual conversation, oh, the markets were up today. Oh, the markets were way down today. The markets were flat today. They're not actually referencing what the investment or stock market did fully, universally, comprehensively. They're referencing what an index did. And if we think about index in a context where we understand it better, it makes total sense, right? You're reading a big textbook for class. Back of the book has a what? An index. It tells you overall in this very concise, limited fashion what's in that book and where you can find it. An index like the Dow Jones, like the S&P 500, NASDAQ, they're taking a certain number of stocks. The Dow Jones, which is the one people reference the most, I think only looks at like 5 different stocks, something like that. The Russell 2000 is looking at, anybody want to guess? 2,000 different stocks. The S&P 500, okay, this is an easy one, softball. How many stocks do you think? 500. But my point is then by looking at what each individual one of those things did. So maybe you're a baseball fan listening to this and you watched 9 players come up to bat during an inning. I don't know how many players come up to bat because I don't know much of anything about sports, but in a typical inning, you watch these 9 batters, one hit a home run, one got on base, one struck out, etc. You add up all the runs they generated for that inning, and maybe you get 4. So the index of those batters was +4. That's it. That's all these market indexes are doing. And so that's where to invest. Ask your benefits person, look through the catalog from your retirement vendor. Where is the S&P 500 index fund? And put your retirement savings there. And you say, well, I want to know what it's going to do. There's easy ways to figure that out. There's bunches of calculators, and that might be motivating for some of us. It can be hard to give up the money up front. That's why I love focusing on first job out of college. Most of us, we lived like peasants in college. We might have been having a great time, but we really weren't living luxuriously. If you had a car, it was probably kind of a hoopty. If you had your own place, the floors were so unlevel, your boyfriend threw his back out. That might be a real life story, Amy, just dropping in there. You might have had carpet in your kitchen, but inexplicably hardwood in all the other rooms. Yeah,
It's a real
weird.
special place, wasn't it?
It was such a dump, but it was $10 a day, basically, was your rent. People are listening right now who would probably jump out of a 3-story window to get an apartment for $300 a month because it had its own bathroom, it had its own kitchen. It wasn't bad. It had one heater, but I'm off track. My point is, like, when you're coming out of college, you're used to living lean. You can increase your lifestyle and provide for your future self. You can do both if you're careful, if you're lucky.
It's time to pause our time with Jeremy because there's more to come. Thank you for listening to this first part of our conversation. And remember, the real life strategies will continue in episode 22 as we finish our chat with Jeremy. If you have questions, thoughts, and even more ideas and strategies to share with our community, use the comments feature in Spotify, on Facebook, or on Instagram to continue this conversation. Please remember how fast and easy it is to hit the like button wherever you are listening, and consider sharing this episode with someone you love or even like a little.
Thanks for tuning in to This Was Supposed to Be Easy. Remember, the best stories are the ones we live.
Join us next time as we uncover more tales and thoughts that just might change your world while we navigate those things that we didn't expect to be so hard.
Stay curious, stay connected, and keep wondering.